Hey everyone! In that last video I showed a simple and effective way to do surface mount soldering with no extra tools, no extra supplies. I run across a lot of people in the forums who think that they're not equipped to try surface mount work. So that video was meant to give you the confidence that you can in fact go ahead and give it a try. But quite a few people pointed out that they like to use extra flux, and I think some people were concerned that I didn't. So this is our flux follow-up, where we're going to show how you can more quickly and easily do surface mount soldering with some additional flux. That said, I do think it's important to develop the skill without it first, because that's going to teach you to learn to recognize when you have good solder joints. You want to be able to recognize when that solder is flowing up onto the component leg and onto the pad. And sometimes flux can get in the way or mask that, or give you this false sense of confidence that it's just going to magically happen on its own. So you need to develop those good core techniques first. But that said, if we want to add some additional flux, there are a lot of different formats we can find it in, but two really easy and popular ones are these Flux liquid pens. So what this does is it's got a cloth tip in there, and when you press it down, it dispenses flux into the tip and lets you rub it onto your circuit board and your component. Or we can use these syringes that have a thicker, tackier, sticky sort of flux compound. We're going to use this thicker stuff today because for a couple of reasons. First, it doesn't evaporate as quickly, it doesn't burn off as quickly, and then most of all, it'll help hold those pieces onto the circuit board and prevent them from wiggling off their spot if you bump the table or something. So it helps hold them in place. All right, so let's take a moment to talk about the different techniques we used in the previous video versus this one, and what flux is for generally. So in this video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be moving a little more quickly through our solder joints by applying additional solder to the tip of the iron and letting the tip of the iron just dab the solder into each joint. And then we'll only add more solder from the solder wire when necessary, when it starts to dry up on the tip. Now, we might wonder, why didn't we do that in the previous video? Well, it's simple, because when we melt the solder onto the tip of that iron, all of the flux that's in that solder wire gets burned off immediately. And if we do that without additional flux on the board and on the components, we won't get as good of a joint, because what that flux does is that helps to remove a layer of oxidation from the component and from the pad, and so it allows the solder to flow more smoothly and bond to that metal. So in that previous video, we would apply the heat and apply the solder wire to each and every joint, and that's because we want to melt that solder directly from the solder wire so we get that flux into that joint. Now this time we're not going to need to be quite as careful or as slow and deliberate, because we're just going to slather this flux all over each of these pads. And here we're going to be soldering an FV-1, which is a 14-pin SOIC DSP, a digital signal processing chip for a guitar pedal. So first I'm going to just set this chip on there, get it lined up, get it in place, and then I'm going to take my soldering iron, make sure it's clean, tin the tip, and then put a little bit of solder on there. And then I'm going to dab that solder onto a couple joints on either side to tack it into place. So now that chip's held on there, and I'm going to go ahead and clean my iron again, get it set up, get some solder on it, and then just start working across each of these pins. And if it doesn't seem like there's enough solder on the tip, what I'm going to do is just apply a little bit more from the wire. And then I'm just going to go through one by one, just like we did last time, but this time it's a little bit easier, a little bit smoother. And you'll see from time to time I'll go back and I'll retouch one of the joints if I don't think it flowed very well, or if I don't think there's enough solder on there. And so here you can see we're really starting to speed up. That first half went a little bit slower. And now some people are going to say that drag soldering is a lot quicker and better, and maybe there's some truth to that, but I do hundreds like this, and I really like this method because it allows me to focus on each joint individually, one at a time, and really watch it and make sure it's a good joint, and that the solder has flowed across the entire pad and arced up onto the leg. Now that said, we will demonstrate a little bit of drag soldering here, or at least my version of it. So again, we start by putting some flux on the board, and then we're going to take one of these 14-pin microcontrollers, line it up, set it on the pads just like we did before. The big difference now is this time I'm going to use a different type of tip. Rather than a pencil type tip, it's going to be more of a beveled tip. It's a big flat end. And so what I'll do is I'll clean that really well, rub it on my sponge, get it good and shiny, and then put a little bit of solder on the tip and let it pool up and collect on there. It's going to hold quite a bit more than the other tips we used. And then just like before, I'm going to tack down the corners. And then I'm going to go ahead and just drag it across all the pins. And so it goes a lot quicker, but sort of two downsides you'll find here is number one, you'll get some solder bridges. You'll get pins bridged together. And to address those, I'm just going to put a little bit of flux on there and then clean off the tip and then just apply a little more heat, and that bridge should usually go away. The other problem that you sometimes run into is when you drag that tip across, you may not expose the leg or the pad to heat for long enough, and so you might not get a great joint. So you got to really get your technique down, make sure you get your speeds good, and make sure you're really checking your work. And that's it. I hope you found this helpful. Once you follow the previous video and get your basics down packed, $5 or so invested in a little syringe of flux like this can definitely help you up your game a bit and be able to solder surface mount a little more quickly and a little more confidently. So yeah, have fun.